This guy lived on an island for 4 years, even though he couldn't even start a fire. But what ends up happening will melt your heart. It's 1995. We see a FedEx truck delivering a package in the middle of nowhere. This is the long story of Chuck Noland, a time-obsessed Federal Express executive. I want to give you an idea of how important time is to Chuck. Here's an example. He opens a package he sent to himself from FedEx headquarters in Tennessee. The package contains a small timer. The box took 87 hours to arrive in Moscow. This is a deplorable delivery time, considering FedEx's primary business strategy of delivering packages overnight. While giving a motivational speech to the staff, the translator recalls a past incident in which Chuck stole a child's bicycle when his delivery vehicle broke down.
What are you saying about me?
This man, when his truck broke down, he stole a boy's bicycle.
I borrowed it.
Chuck insists that he simply borrowed the bike and delivered the package on time. This episode is quite fascinating, but at the same time, I feel sorry for the little kid. With 15 minutes to go, the packages in the warehouse need to be taken to the airport. On the way, a problem arises when one of the trucks from the Moscow office is stormed into Red Square. So, parcel sorting is done on the street. In the meantime, Chuck calls his girlfriend, Kelly, and leaves a message saying that he will be back in less than 24 hours and that he needs to see a dentist since a tooth is bothering him. After the sorting is done and he returns to the airport, he meets up in the airport with his colleague and friend, Stan. One of the crew members asks about Stan's wife, who is battling cancer. The mood becomes somber, and Chuck seems pensive about the news. Chuck returns to Memphis, home of FedEx, and visits Kelly, a PhD student. Chuck is head over heels in love with her, but unfortunately, fusing dating life with work isn't easy. While having dinner with their family on Christmas Eve, he receives a message telling him that he has to go to Malaysia. His girlfriend is worried that they won't be able to spend Christmas together, and Chuck suggests that they exchange gifts in the car. They drive to his departure point at the airport and exchange Christmas gifts. He gives her a leather journal, and she hands him an antique clock that belonged to her grandfather. Inside the lid, there is a picture of her. Chuck promises her that he will always keep it set to Memphis time to remind him to come home. Before he leaves for his plane, he gives her a small box. Although not shown explicitly, it is an engagement ring. He had planned to propose on New Year's Eve, but then decided to do it earlier. Finally, he asks her to not open it until Christmas. He is the only passenger traveling in the elevated seat of a FedEx MD-11 freighter across the Pacific Ocean. Chuck wakes up when the plane hits some turbulence. A violent storm puts the lives of the crew at risk. The pilots try to get around the storm when they no longer have radio contact. Chuck goes to the bathroom to freshen up a bit. Suddenly, the door opens wide, and Chuck is almost sucked out of the plane due to depressurization. He returns to his seat and receives a life raft from one of the crew members. The plane goes straight ahead at a very high speed and crashes into the ocean. Water rushes into the fuselage in a flash. Chuck reaches the surface and climbs into the raft, seeing one of the engines explode. Miraculously surviving, he passes out and is carried away by the giant waves. Sometime later, the raft is damaged, and Chuck arrives on the shore of a tiny tropical island. He immediately discovers that his pager is soaked in water, and Kelly's watch is equally ruined. He looks around in fright as FedEx packages from the crashed plane arrive on the beach shore. He screams for help, but to no avail. He soon realizes he is alone and writes help on the beach, hoping he will be noticed. He spends the evening looking at Kelly's watch while admiring the sunset. The next day, more packages arrive, and in the process, Chuck hears noises nearby.
What is that?
He soon realizes that the sound comes from falling coconuts. Thirst overrides curiosity, and he sets out to open the coconuts instead of checking the packages. At first, he tried throwing the coconuts against a giant rock, but with no success. Then, by smashing a piece of rock, he obtains a sharp part. When he attempted to open it, he wasted a coconut. Learning from the mistake, he managed to successfully hydrate himself. Wandering on the beach, he found a small cave in the rock. He cut off his foot and covered his feet by cutting off some clothes in the process. Climbing to the top, he notices what appears to be a man's body. Chuck approaches and is horrified by what he finds. He realizes that it's the body of one of the plane's pilots. He takes his shoes and other valuable things from him, after which he buries him. The next day, Chuck found some rainwater that he could drink. Turning the coconut into a container, he collected water from the leaves. Chuck doesn't give up, and like Bear Grylls, he tries to survive at all cost. He tried to fish, but being inexperienced, he scared them away. At night, while urinating, Chuck sees the lights of a ship. Using a small flashlight recovered from the pilot's body, he tries to signal the ship, but has no luck. The following day, He attempts to leave the island on the jet's rubber raft. The high, aggressive waves capsize the raft. He is thrown over the reef, and his thigh is severely lacerated. He returned to the beach, and due to the storm, he decided to sleep in the cave. He found a small puddle and tried to take sips, but it was too dirty, and he fell asleep. He woke up dehydrated and with severe thigh inflammation. I thought nothing could be worse than waking up on a Monday morning, but I was wrong. Taking the last sips from a coconut, Chuck opens the FedEx packages. He discovers several items useful for his survival, including a pair of ice skates, a leather and lace dress, videotapes, and a legal document declaring a divorce. One parcel contains a volleyball that will later accompany Chuck throughout his adventure. Finally, he finds a parcel decorated with a pair of wings, and for unexplained reasons, Chuck doesn't open it. He starts by building a simple camp, using ice skates as a knife. On the same day, he managed to catch a small minnow that he devoured in a second. Then he tries to start a fire by rubbing a stick against a piece of wood. Failing to do so, he eats the coconut, despite having a tooth that was giving him trouble. After recovering his energy, he tried again to light the fire, but in the process, injured his hand. In a fury, he grabs the volleyball and throws it. His severed hand leaves a bloody imprint on the ball. Looking at it, Chuck draws a face, calling the ball Wilson. Thus, the ball becomes his companion. Shortly after that, Chuck realizes that the fire didn't ignite due to the lack of oxygen. Correcting the mistake, he lit the fire and celebrated throughout the evening.
I have made fire! I have made fire!
In addition, he cooked a juicy crab that boosted his mood even more. Then he began to describe to Wilson the flight path of his jet, doubting that it would ever be found. Chuck's tooth was getting worse in the long run, so he decided to pull it out with ice skates and a rock. With a hard blow, Chuck falls unconscious due to severe pain. A full 4 years pass, and Chuck looks more and more like a Greek god. By now, he can catch fish without struggling and eat them raw. Despite losing 50 pounds, he survives by eating fish, coconuts, and other seafood. 2 of the broken portable toilet walls are washed up on the beach during a storm. As he watches it closely, Chuck is suddenly excited by the idea of building a raft using the fiberglass walls as an improvised sail. He gets right to work, cuts down the trees, and prepares his raft. He braids a rope of local tree bark and videotape that weren't very durable to tie the poles together. When Chuck finishes scouting the island and finds that all the saplings have been cut down, he tells Wilson that they will have to use the rest of the rope from the videotape. Wilson suggests where Chuck can get more rope, but he becomes very reluctant. Chuck climbs to the top of the island's peak and retrieves the rope. Chuck was contemplating suicide a few years earlier and had tied the rope to a dummy to test it. In the evening, Chuck counts down the days it takes to catch the northeast trade winds he hopes will take him into the shipping lanes and rescue. Chuck isn't sure where he's headed, but thinks he'd rather die trying than spend the rest of his life alone on the island. At one point, he imagines that Wilson is telling him that the plan won't work and throws him out of his cave. Immediately remorseful, Chuck runs outside and finds Wilson, apologizing to him. He cuts his hand to redraw Wilson's face with blood. The next day is the decisive day, when Chuck leaves the island for good. He ties his buddy, Wilson, and the wing-decorated FedEx package to the raft. Soon after, a high wave is about to capsize the boat, but with his new sail and a pair of improvised oars, he can navigate the reef waves. One night, Chuck encounters a significant ballena passing by him. He continues to fish and collect rainwater to survive. Chuck encounters a few storms as he sails, but the sail also serves as a shelter until it is carried away by the wind. The next day, exhausted, he wakes up and sees Wilson floating away. He tries to save Wilson, but is forced to let go of the balloon, fearing he will lose the raft. Discouraged that he has lost Wilson, he spends the next few hours crying. He has almost given up hope of being rescued, but then he is awakened by the cast of another whale. As he continues to sleep, a container ship passes nearby. After that, an alert goes off on the ship. Soon after, we see Kelly get the big news and pass out. A month later, Chuck is flown home to Memphis. On the plane home, he talks to Stan, who tells Chuck that they held a funeral with a casket they filled with small items in Chuck's honor. Chuck is the guest of honor at a sizable welcome reception hosted by the FedEx company. Kelly intended to meet Chuck at the celebration, but felt very confused. Her husband, an orthodontist who had done dental work on Chuck, apologizes for his absence. He tells Chuck that Kelly is having a hard time coping with his sudden reappearance, so he asks Chuck to give her more time. Then, looking out the window, he sees Kelly in tears, comforted by her husband. An extensive buffet is served at the reception. Chuck looks thoughtfully at the giant crab legs that have been served, remembering the crabs on the island. In the evening, Chuck settles down to sleep on the floor as he looks at the watch Kelly gave him. Later that evening, Chuck takes a cab to Kelly's house. She seems to be waiting for him and invites him in. They talk about little things, and he learns how much her life and ambitions have changed and how she has dealt with his supposed death. Chuck gives Kelly back the watch she gifted and tells her it should stay in her family. Kelly reveals that the company assumed that a package had caught fire and caused the accident. She shows him that his island was more than 600 miles from the Cook Islands, around which the search was conducted. Then Kelly shows him that she had kept his old Jeep. Chuck is about to drive away, and the two exchange a kiss. He slowly drives away in the pouring rain. Kelly suddenly runs after him, shouting his name. Chuck turns back, and the two hug fiercely in the pouring rain. She tells him that she always believed that he was alive, but that others said she should move on. They realize that they are still in love, and they talk for a few minutes in his car. Then Chuck drives Kelly home, respecting that she has moved on with her life. Chuck later tells Stan about what he went through on the island for 4 years. He confesses the utter despair and helplessness on the island, describing his failed suicide attempt. In addition to his love for Kelly, Chuck felt a sense of hope tied to a FedEx package decorated with angel wings. The symbolism of the angel wings on the package prevented Chuck from opening it, and he saw it as a sign that he was meant to deliver the package. The next day, he leaves for a trip to Texas to deliver the package. When no one answers the door, he leaves the package and a note saying that the box saved his life. After leaving the house, he comes to a fork in the road, and a woman in a pickup truck gives him directions. As she drives away, Chuck sees that the back of the woman's truck is painted with angel wings. Chuck heads for the intersection and starts down the open road before the movie hits the credits. With nothing to hold him back and no relationship to return to, Chuck finds himself at a literal and metaphorical crossroads in his life, with its unlimited options. Click here to find out what happens to a family isolated from the outside world by their parents.